This is Lagoon Radio.
Good morning this morning, good morning Lagos, good morning Nigeria, and good morning to the old planet Earth. At least we are still on the planet Earth, or some people are still in the Mars anyway. How you doing this morning, and welcome to the newspaper review here on Lagoon Radio, as we're broadcasting live to you from Marina, Lagos, and you can connect with us via our social media handles, Facebook, Lagoon Radio Nigeria, and of course on YouTube, LagoonTV. And for more news update, you can catch up with us on Lagoon.News and Instagram and Twitter pages. Our handles are Lagoon Radio.Ng. Okay, you're welcome once again to the newspaper review. My name is Olabisi Simidili, okay, and I won't be doing this alone. I have some other pilots here with me in the studio. I have Alao Olumakaiye Sola and Taiwo Adeola Shabio Legbe. They are saying good morning to you all, and I hope work is going on smoothly. Okay, we have few newspapers for you this morning. We shall be reviewing them together, and in no particular order, we have the Nigerian News Direct, we have the Daily Champion, People's Daily Blueprint, New Telegraph, National Economy Leadership, we have the Nigerian Pilot, we have the Daily Independent, Nigerian Tribune, and of course this day, and the Daily Time. The Daily Times. Okay, I'll be starting with the Nigerian News Direct, and boldly written at the front page of the Nigerian News Direct, we have APC National Convention, Northern Caucus scrambles for chairmanship slot. We have some riders under it as Buhari case February 2022 for convention. Caretaker Extraordinary Committee illegal aberration of Nigerian Constitution, says IPAC chairman. APC to scout next presidential candidate from South, says Ogunriyade. And right at the top, as regards the 21-story building collapse, probe panel calls for public submission of memoranda. Can get that on page 13 of the Nigerian News Direct. Concerning child trafficking, please rescue 2 newborn babies in Ebonyi. That's on page 3 of Nigerian News Direct. As ICPC arraigns Gwagolada Council Chairman over 10 million naira fraud. That's on page 2 of the Nigerian News Direct. And the NSAS inquiry, fundamental errors in findings of Lagos panel inconsistent with evidence of witnesses, says Eniton, the senior advocate of Nigeria.
So moving on to the Daily Champion newspaper for this morning, debt to First Bank, flour mills acquires Honeywell flour mills for 80 billion naira. So there's a change from flour mill to Honeywell flour mills. That can be found on page 4. Senate queries Ilorin Teaching Hospital over 167 million naira alleged fraud. You can read up more on page 3 of the Daily Champion. Ikeja Electric advocates sanctions against activity on the power lines. You can read up on page 8 of the Daily Champion. Ikoyi building collapse, panel gives ultimatum for submission of memoranda. More news can be found on page 12. Concerning Osun 22 elections, endorsements are reflections of your good works. Purposeful leadership, Islamic clerics tells Oyetola. You can read up more on page 6. And to the major headline for Daily Champion, make oil theft treasonable offense. Wike tells the federal government, and the rider under that says, VAT suits which prove whether Nigeria respects rule of law or not. You can read up more on page 6. And by the side, Buhari pledges support to Africa First Ladies on promotion of peace. Aisha Buhari emerges president of AFLMP. WAEC releases its WAEC results. It's 81% scores credits in English and math. ICE exam fees. You can read up more on page 3. APC holds National Convention in February. You can read up more on page 5 of the Daily Champion paper. Police arrest 2 female child traffickers for concealing 7-old-day baby in Bako Super Sack in Ebonyi. As CP vows to prosecute perpetrators, you can read up more on page 3. Uzodinma says to reconstitute cabinet and nominate 17 commissioner designates. You can read up more on all of these on page 3 of the Daily Champions newspaper.
Moving on to the People's Daily newspaper. Police snap spiritual leader of bandits in FCT, Niger, Nasarawa State. Malam Wahid Maida, 1950 to 2020, founding chairman, board of the People's Daily Media Limited. Okay, boldly written on the paper, massacre of citizens along Abuja, Kaduna Way National Shame, ACF. The story is on page 5 and you can read up more on it. 20 billion naira bailout saga, retract, apologize now, Kogi government tells EFCC. You can read up more in the paper. Direct primary, NAS expects Buhari to sign electoral bill, says Lawan. The story is on page 4, you can read up. Alleged contempt court orders fresh service on IGP and AGF. The story is on page 3. Buhari approves February for APC National Convention. The story is on page 6. Fan efforts to commence flight to Benue. The story is also on page 6 of the paper. I think that'll be all on People's Daily. All right, thank you, Shaban. On to Blueprint Papers. Electoral Act, all eyes on Buhari for his ascent, says Lawal. As APC chieftains hails Gbajabia Miller on direct primaries. Can get the full details on page 6 of the Blueprint. Comic actor Babasue dies at 63. Can check that out on page 5 of the Blueprint Papers. May so rest in peace. Senate uncovers 16 billion naira illegal stocked in 2022 budget. That's on page 7 of the Blueprint Papers. AFCFTA to eliminate 90% tariff. Reduce non-tariff barriers. That's on page 21 of the Blueprint Papers and boldly written on the Blueprint at the front page of the Blueprint Papers. 20 months after, Buni leads APC to convention February as announces plan after meeting Buhari. Party won't implode despite crisis, says governors. Can get that on page 6 of the Blueprint Papers. WAEC increases exam fees to 18,000 naira, releases 2021 results. That's on page 7 of the Blueprint Papers. Bandits kill 4 in Katsina community. Please nab spiritualist in Niger. On page 5 of the Blueprint Papers. Only 6 countries respect ECOWAS court ruling, says Justice Ashanti. That's on page 12 of the Blueprint Papers. Dutse Varsity bans night visitations to female hostels. That's on page 8 of the Blueprint Papers. And lastly, on the Blueprint Papers, professor arrested for allegedly raping minor at Ebonyi University. That's it can be found also on the inside of the Blueprint Papers.
Okay, so moving on to the New Telegraph newspaper. Get vaccinated or lose your jobs, federal government tells workers on page 3 concerning COVID-19 and sets December 1st as deadline, says unvaccinated are threats to others. You can read up all of this on page 3 of the New Telegraph paper. Pension operators paid up share capital hits 40.29 billion naira. It says NPFAs made 5 billion naira recapitalization target. Nigeria will regain its value soon, says Ade Dikwe. You can read up more of these on page 17 of the New Telegraph paper. Okowa to federal government addresses rising cost of cooking gas. And that says that you can read up more on page 13 and page 29 of the New Telegraph newspaper. Oil theft thrives because military and police and others are involved, Wike says on page 3 of the New Telegraph newspaper. Fidelity Bank on year-end tubo with Fidelity for You campaign. You can read up more on this on page 2. Ohaneze women Northern groups disagree over Nnamdi Kanu's release. All of this can be found on page 5 of the New Telegraph paper. Senate uncovers 16 billion naira fraud in ministry's 2022 budget as federal government moves to plant 692 million trees in northern Nigeria. You can read up more on page 3 of the New Telegraph paper. Kaduna Abuja Highway, whole bandit killed. Zamfara APC Guba, hopeful kidnapped scores. You can read up more on page 2. And finally, studies shows that excess body fat increases risk of digestive system cancers. Read up more if you have interest for this on page 8 of the New Telegraph paper.
All right, I'll move on to the leadership newspaper. Exhibitors hail Nexim Bank impact showing at Durban. The story is on the front page and you can continue reading on page 7. And the major headline on the paper says attacks on Abuja Kaduna Road, a national shame, says ACF. And the writer to the story says bandits kill 4 in Castina, 11 rescued in Kaduna. Bandit spiritual leader arrested in Niger. Insurgents, bandits fueling poverty, says PMB. Northern leaders lack courage to confront challenges, coalition. All this you can read up on page 4 of the paper. Wike to federal government. Consider oil theft as treason. The story is on page 4. You can read more on that. Fire raises 41 shops at Kano Market. The story is on page 5. You can read up on that as well. Veteran comic actor Babasuwe passes on. The story is on page 4. May his soul rest in peace.
Amen.
WAEC raises SSC registration fee by 29%. The story is on page 6, and you can read up on that. APC to elect party officers in February convention, and the writer to that story says, Buni denies delaying Congress to extend tenure. You can continue reading on page 7 as well. And lastly, don't release Kanu, Northern Youth tell PMB. The story is on page 6 as well. All right, and moving on to Nigerian pilot. WAEC increases SSC registration from 13,950 naira to 18,000 naira. Release a result. That's on page 5 of the Nigerian pilot. As concerning oil leakage, ITIL engages well control specialists. As on page 9 of the Nigerian pilot. Black Monday. Many feared dead as fire raises 5 boats with passengers trapped in them. Incident took place at Boni Bile Nembe Jetty in Port Harcourt. Boats discharging locally refined petroleum products when fire erupted. We cannot ascertain number of casualties at the moment, says the police spokesman. Can get the full details on page 8 of the Nigerian pilot. Federal Unity Colleges in ruin, says Minister of State for Education. That's on page 7 of the Nigerian pilot as APC finally fixes National Convention for February 2022. That's on page 5 of the Nigerian pilot. Old Lagos State government, if anything happens to me, says Adegborua. That's on page 8 of the Nigerian pilot papers. Federal government will act on parts of NSAS report, says Femi Adeshino. That can be found on page 5 of the Nigerian pilot papers as well. AFDB to invest $110 million on infrastructure development in Kano. On page 12, civil fight to resume in Makurdi as Air Force, FAN, NAMA and NIMET sign agreement. That can be found on page 11 of the Nigerian pilot. And lastly, on page 8 of the Nigerian pilot papers, 16 billion naira stock in 2022 budget untidy anomaly, says Ike Ekweremadu.
Okay, so moving on to the leadership newspaper. It says exhibitors hail Nexim Bank impact showing at Durban. You can read up more on page 7. Attacks on Abuja Kaduna Road, a national shame, says ACF. And the weather under that says bandits kill 4 in Castina, 11 rescued in Kaduna State. Bandit spiritual leader arrested in Niger. Insurgents and bandits falling poverty, PMB says. Northern leaders lack courage to confront challenges, says coalition. You can read up all of these on page 4 of the leadership newspaper. Wicked to federal government consider oil theft a treason. You can read up on page 6. Fire raises 41 shops at Kano markets. You can read up more on page 6 of the leadership newspaper. Veteran comic actor Babasue passes on page 6 as well. And wire crazes and release their WAEC fees by 29%, still on page 6 of the leadership newspaper. APC to elect party officials in February over convention, and says Boni denies the Lane Congress to extend tenure. You can read up all of these on page 7. And finally, don't release Kano, Northern Youth tells PMB. You can read up all of these and more on page 6 of the leadership newspaper.
Thank you very much, Koinsala.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, I'll just jump to the Nigerian Tribune newspaper. At the very top of the paper, Senate uncovers 16 billion naira tucked in 2022 budget. The story is right on page 5. Killing of citizens on Abuja Kaduna Expressway by bandits, national shame, says ACF. The story is on page 25 and you can read up on that. Buhari okays February for APC convention, page 23 of the paper. Veteran actor Babasui dies at 63. Page 5 of the paper. Absence of Yoruba interpreters stalls arraignment of Igboho's aides. The story is on page 4. You might want to read up on that as well. Flour mills to acquire 71.69% of Honeywell flour for 80 billion naira. The story is on page 6 of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper. And boldly written on the front page, not all governors against direct primary, says Senate President. The writer to the story says, explains why NAS expects Buhari to assent Electoral Act Amendment Bill. The story is on page 22. You might want to read up on that. 3 siblings among dozens feared dead in Rivers waterfront fire. The story is on page 26. Alleged 7.9 billion naira fraud. AGF's letter stalls Stella Odua's arraignment for 6th time. The story is on page 2. You can read up on that. Court strikes out cases against 29-year-old over tweet against Buhari. Okay. You can read up on that. It's going to be an interesting one. The story is on page 29. WAEC, it's 1.7% passes in 5 mandatory subjects. WAEC increases exam fee to 18,000 naira. Why? You can read up and find out that on page 5 of the paper. OAE postgraduate student autopsy conducted, result out in 3 weeks. The story is on page 27. We'll be here and we'll be sure to bring to your hearing when the result comes out. I don't know why you should. Does it really take that long?
Maybe, could be, it depends.
Okay. Still on the paper, NSAS panel, government lawmakers weeping more than the bereaved, says Falano. And the writer to that says NSAS protesters who testified before Lagos panel attacked council claims. Old government responsible if anything happens to me. Adegboruwa. Okay. Areas that affect federal government will be addressed. Presidency. Adamawa panel submits report to okay. That's quite tiny. Well, all this you can read up on page 27. Ikoyi collapse building tribunal gives deadline for submission of memoranda. Says result of test on construction materials being awaited. This you can read up on page 2 of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on to the Daily Independent, right at the top, Northern Coalition warns against release of Nnamdi Kanu. Can get that on the inside of the Daily Independent papers. And we expect Buhari to assent to Electoral Act Amendment Bill, says Lawan. Says NAS may pass 2022 budget before Christmas. Also can be found on the inside of the Daily Independent papers, and boldly written at the front page of the Daily Independent papers concerning the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. Don't endanger your political future. APC governors won AGF, and the rider says to meet Buhari over direct primaries role. Party holds national convention February 2022. Insurers risk sanction for violating daily transaction upload, as scores fell dead as fire raises boats at Port Harcourt jetty. That's on page 7 of the Daily Independent papers. Then Flour Mills acquires Honeywell Flour Mill. That's on page 7 of the Daily Independent papers as well. Still on Babasue, comedy legend is dead. That can be found on page 6 of the Daily Independent papers as value-added tax battle aimed at strengthening rule of law, says Wiki. That can be found on page 7 of the Daily Independent papers.
So moving on to this day newspaper, Honeywell Groups agrees 80 billion naira deal with Flour Mills of Nigeria. Firm to acquire First Bank's 5.6% equity in Honeywell. Transaction will create strong national food campaign. You can read up all of these on page. These pages are so tiny. Page 10 of this day newspaper. CBN's partners payment system providers fintech to deepen in-era adoption. You can read up more on page 5. Lawan to governors should have dialogue, not combative over direct primaries. Declares matter now out of legislature's control, and says National Assembly expects Buhari to sign the Electoral Act. You can read up more on page 11 of this day newspaper. With Buhari's consent, APC to hold National Convention in February 2022, stakeholders to determine exact dates. All of these can be found on page 11. NAFDAC says Nigeria has met WHO's conditions for local vaccination manufacturing. You can read up more on page 6 of the Daily newspaper. That is all on that.
All right, I'll be taking the Daily Times newspaper. At the very top of the paper, Buhari asked African First Ladies to contribute to peaceful society as Aisha Buhari emerges president of AFLPM. The story is on the front page and you can continue reading on page 2. Nigerian does not need provincial leader, Tambuwal, this concerning the 2023 election. And the writer to the story says, insecurity in Nigeria has worsened living conditions of people. Ex-MBA president calls on Buhari to prioritize security. The story is on the front page and you can continue reading on page 3. Now we have NSAS report. Areas that affect federal government will be addressed. Additional. The story is on the front page. You can continue reading on page 2 as well. APC National Convention President Buhari endorses February 2022. You can continue reading on page 13. Heritage Bank CEO wins Banker of the Year, SMEs and Agric 2021 award. You can continue reading on page 4. Don't release Nnamdi Kanu, Northern Coalition tells Buhari. The story is on page 5 of the paper, and we can see at the front page pictures, and of course we have the caption there. When you get the paper, you can find out more on the Daily Times newspaper.
All right, thank you very much, Shab and Koinsola, and thank you all for connecting with us on today's edition of the newspaper review here on Lagoon Radio. Don't forget to follow us on all our social media handles: Facebook, Lagoon Radio Nigeria, Instagram and Twitter at Lagoonradio.Ng. And if you need to catch up with today's edition of the newspaper review, you can go to our YouTube channel on LagoonTV. You can subscribe and turn on your notifications as well. Don't forget, we have exciting shows for you today from 10 to 11, 12, 1, till late in the evening, and Lagoon Radio is here to serve you 24 hours and to keep you active. Once again, my name is Olabisi Simidele Oke. It's a good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This is Lagoon Radio.